Wish We Could Turn Back Time by Girlinpink44, Chapter 11. Tony had gotten permission from a farmer to land his private jet in one of the lesser-used fields on the outskirts of Rose Hill, Tennessee. Stepping out, he was almost overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia. For him, it had been over 5 years since he had visited this town. Probably closer to 7. Harley had taken to coming to see him in New York, wanting to escape the small town he lived in and have a chance to play in Tony's lab. And Tony couldn't begrudge him that opportunity. Harley! Across the field by the road stood Rose Keener. A toddler stood beside her. Abigail. Mom! The 6-year-old ran off as fast as his small legs could carry him, and he found himself in his mum's arms. Tony watched the scene as he moved at a more sedate pace.
Good to see you again, Rose. Sorry for dragging you into my mess.
Tony Stark, what exactly did you do? She turned from Harley to face the man. While Rose Keener didn't intimidate him quite like May Parker, and Pepper, did, they had their fair share of arguments and understandings over the years.
In my defense, I didn't actually do it this time. 6 cosmic stones decided we needed a little reset.
Her face paled. How bad was it?
We lost. Badly. Even when we won, the cost was too great. The cost too high.
He turned and waved over some of the people who were in the jet.
I want you to meet some people.
It took a second for the Parkers and Pepper to join them.
You remember Pepper?
Ms. Potts. Rose, it's Pepper. You let my fiancé emotionally adopt your kid. And now you've joined us on this little time travel adventure. Pepper, Rose smiled.
And this is May, Ben, and Peter Parker.
He nodded to each Parker.
Peter was the kid I mentioned I wanted Harley to meet over the summer. As predicted, they got along like a house on fire.
Peter waved shyly from the spot he had hidden at just behind Tony's leg. Nice to meet you. You too, Peter. And you as well, Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Please, it's May and Ben. May held her hand out and Rose shook it. I'm always up for another person to join Pepper and I ganging up against our idiot geniuses.
Hey!
Tony and Peter both turned to May. Tony held in a snort at the attempt that Peter's face was making towards indignant, but it really came out as more of a kicked puppy. I'll always welcome tips on how to deal with idiot geniuses, Rose smiled.
Mom!
Harley glared at her. Tony laughed and then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a phone.
Congratulations on owning one of the first ever Stark phones. I'll be relaunching the line in a few months, but so far, just the Time Team has one.
Tony, I can't accept.
You can, Rose. If nothing else, it'll help us keep in touch. Also, Pepper and I need to sit down with you, May, and Ben to discuss the boys' schooling. We're going to have to get creative with their curriculum.
Rose eyed Harley. Maybe New York would be best.
It's an option we'll consider when the time comes.
Tony nodded, aware that it would probably be the best option. New York had a lot more options for gifted kids.
Now, Harley, no more running off again. Not till you're in double digits at least.
Harley pouted. You'll come visit?
I will.
Tony knelt down beside the boy.
You're stuck with me, kid.
I can live with that. Harley ran into his arms and hugged him tightly. Take care of yourself, mechanic.
You too, Potato.
Bye, Pete. Later, Keener. I'll get Aunt May to text your mum when I make progress on my part of the plans. Sounds good. Maybe we could ask the adults into setting up an email account for us.
We'll see,
all 6 adults answered. Having been born and raised in New York, Tony had to admit he loved coming back to live there full time. Sure, this time he was going to not get his Malibu mansion blown to pieces, but there was just so many things in New York that nowhere else had. As they pulled into the familiar private airstrip, Tony couldn't help but grin at the familiar skyline in the distance. As they deplaned, Tony looked around.
I loved spending the week in Malibu, but New York has felt more home-like lately.
It will always be home for me. Peter came up beside him, even if I can't protect her quite yet.
You've got some growing up to do, Spiderling. Don't worry, when you're old enough, I won't stop you. But for now, how about you embrace being a kid again? Build Legos, watch Star Wars, play in the park.
I'm not a kid.
You are. More so than you were before. Don't rush growing up, Rue.
Tony ruffled his hair.
Let's get you back to your apartment.
They loaded into the SUV that was awaiting them, barely fitting their whole crew. Happy was behind the wheel and began making the familiar drive to the Parkers' apartment. Tony ended up with Peter next to him, the kid yet again disgruntled at the fact that he had to ride in a booster seat due to his height. Traffic was the norm for New York City, so they crawled their way to Queens. The skyline seemed off without the tower there.
Pep, how are we coming along getting the land for the tower?
I put the proposal in on Thursday. They said it would be a month before we get word. Considering it's us, it'll probably be sooner. I remember who we used last time and we'll get the process started faster. It'll still be a couple of years before it's ready.
I'll find a place in the meantime. Tony waved it off. I want to be back here full time before Pete starts school in the fall. Have Stain dealt with and ready to go.
They continued chatting as they made their way towards the apartment. They passed Midtown High and Peter perked up when he saw Delmar's. I could go for a sandwich. May groaned. Great, he went into the bottomless pit phase early. Happy pulled over, already sensing the fact that Tony was about to give in and get the kid a sandwich. Tony loved how Happy knew both Peter and Tony well enough to know the little things like that without Tony having to state them. Grabbing a baseball cap and sunglasses, Tony and the others got out of the SUV and headed into the grocer/deli.
Peter! I didn't see you at all this week. Mr. Delmar looked up. You're a regular?
Smoosh down real flat, Peter grinned. Delmar rolled his eyes and Tony chuckled.
For you? Of course. And how about the rest of you?
The group turned to take orders. The Parkers, Tony and Happy, more sure than Rhodey and Pepper. Finally, everyone had sandwiches and piled back into the car. Peter happily digging into his sandwich with a lot of enthusiasm. While his appetite wasn't quite where it had been when he was 16, it was a lot larger than the average kid his age. They'd have to figure out his optimum caloric intake for this age. It was something they were still developing for the teenaged version, but at least Tony knew where to start. Finally, they pulled up to the apartment building and the group made their way inside. As usual, the elevator was broken. Tony made a note to either get it fixed by talking to the landlord or personally buying the building and fixing it himself. He wasn't picky about which route he went, but he wasn't climbing all these stairs as often as he had before. He wasn't getting any younger. Well, not any younger than he had already gotten. They exited the stairwell on the correct floor when Peter let out a small shout and took off down the hall. Ned! Peter, where have you been? Tony got his first look at the younger version of Peter's best friend and grinned. Honestly, he hadn't changed a whole lot as he grew. The two met and hugged. I called and you didn't answer, and you weren't there all week. He turned and saw who was in the hallway. Holy! Is that... Tony waved. Ned's mother stood nearby. I'm so sorry, May. I'm not sure what's gotten into him this week. He's been bouncing off the walls wanting to talk to Peter. It's all right, Dolores. I'll keep an eye on him and let them catch up. We'll bring him home after dinner. You're a lifesaver. I've got to get back to work. Behave, Edward. Mom! May chuckled. Let's head inside and Peter can tell you all about our impromptu trip.
I'm going to run out and get the pictures developed.
Ben sat his bag down and pulled out the camera and darted out. That man and his camera. If we had the space, he'd develop them here himself. Tony made a mental note to make sure to include a space for Ben in the tower so that the man could pick up that hobby if he wanted. You won't believe my week! You won't believe what happened! Tony wasn't sure how they were going to explain everything. I think I win, dude. You're gonna think I'm crazy?
I think I'm crazy.
Tony got an odd feeling in his stomach.
There was no way. Ned. It's Ned, right? The kid nodded. I'm going to ask you a crazy question that might lead into your crazy story.
Peter looked at him, the blessedly oblivious child not catching on to what was happening.
Ned, what year was it last week?
That's the thing! One moment it was 2018, and the next it was 2023. You remember? Peter's eyes got wide and he turned to his best friend. You remember? Dude! 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 They performed their handshake. The complicated one Tony had seen a handful of times before hugging again. Tony grinned at the sight, happy that Peter's friend remembered. The kid was incredibly social and had a small circle, and it seemed as if most of that circle was in the know. So, what happened? How are we here? Why are we here? What's going on? Are you going to be Iron Man, Mr. Stark?
One question at a time, Mr. Leeds.
Tony laughed, settling himself on the couch. So, remember that spaceship we saw on the way to MoMA? Peter sat down on the floor, his friend next to him as the adults found seats elsewhere. Ned nodded. So, I ran into Mr. Stark in a park near Greenwich Village fighting aliens. Like actual aliens? Peter nodded. One looked like Squidward. And there were wizards too. And Dr. Banner. You met Bruce Banner? Not really. Kind of saw him in passing.
So cool.
So we ended up in space on another planet. Dad made me a cool Iron Spider suit. Peter leaned against Tony's leg. It wasn't something that was uncommon in the last week, as Peter seemed to seek attention from him at every opportunity.
Hold on. Did you just call Iron Man Dad? Tony chuckled. I'm not Iron Man yet.
Yet is the key word, Mr. Stark.
The kid turned to him. Call me Tony, Ned.
Ned turned to Peter.
I'm on a first-name basis with Iron Man. This is the greatest day of my life.
And you didn't answer my question. Peter shrugged. We talked when we got to California.
I distinctly remember more tears and hugs and less talking.
Dad, you're embarrassing. Tony's hand found its way back into Peter's curls.
It's my job, Bambino.
So you went to space? And we met this alien called Thanos. He was collecting these 6 rocks to get rid of half of the universe. And we lost. That's why we're missing 5 years.
So what happened? The world grieved. It moved on. Well, it tried to.
Tony's hand moved a little faster.
And then we found a way to fix it. But something went wrong, and there was a big battle. And I died with the stones in my hand. And then I was back here.
And so are the rest of us. Apparently you came too. Why?
Tony shrugged. The cost was too high, it seems. We're doing it again.
Wicked. So, what? It's like Prisoner of Azkaban? Except it's a lot more than 3 years? Exactly. Tony leaned forward.
Ned, you're now part of a rather exclusive club.
I don't understand why. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. You're my guy in the chair. Peter nudged his best friend. You're important to me.
The stones decided we needed you, Ned. Welcome to Team Iron Man.
There was something about New York City waking up on a Monday morning and embracing the work week. For Tony, it felt like he woke up in a world that was sleepwalking. At this point, people didn't believe in magic, heroes, aliens, or anything that seemed to make up his life for the past 15 years. But as he left the hotel room, leaving Pepper to work on SI remotely, people seemed to overlook him. There was something he preferred about New York over California. At least until he gave that infamous press conference. He did blend in with the rest of the New York elite. At this point, he was little more than another successful businessman. He made his way over to Bleecker Street, to a place he went once before. While he knew that Dr. Stephen Strange was currently at Columbia Hospital, about to go into surgery, he was still hoping to perhaps find some answers. It wasn't hard to find the building in question. The day he'd first visited this place was one he'd never forget. Walking up the stairs, he knocked on the door and it opened. Walking in, he looked around the foyer.
Hello?
A man out of time. I was wondering when I'd see you. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Oh, little toddler Abigail. Could we just say she doesn't get enough attention? Cute. Anyway, also Harley and Theta being called idiot geniuses, as well as Tony. That was funny. Ned remembers, which is really good for Peter. Like, that would have been tricky for him. And yeah, so we're getting into the New York City sanctum, so that's going to be interesting. The ancient one, that's who that last line was. I'm sorry if I kept messing up Ned's voice. With so many young kid voices and I normally only use one, I'm struggling a bit trying to get them right. So hopefully that'll smooth out in later chapters. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.